Ervin, welcome to Global Purpose. It's a great honor and pleasure to have you with us here today. And would you care to give us a few thoughts on our purpose in the new paradigm?
Well, Emmanuel, it's always a pleasure to talk with you. And you're always posing these very small, minor questions that you do now. And this is it's corresponding, it's a challenge that we would like to pursue sometimes as we sit around the dinner table in the late evening, as we have done a number of times. But we can also do that looking into a screen and talking into a microphone. We can try that, although I prefer the dinner table, actually.
Well, so do I, Ervin, and we have had many nice discussions and looking forward to more.
Okay, let's choose one of these questions, and let me see if I can say something about it, and then we carry on the dialogue after that.
Okay, well, let's start with where have we come from? Was there original purpose in the universe, and why did all this get started?
Well, where we come from, in general, we can answer that is fairly good confidence. The detailed interpretation is then something else. But you can say, you can use a term, nature, cosmos, universe, depending how you interpret it. I like to use the term cosmos that the Greeks use as being the most inclusive one, the most inclusive set of events or realities that we can conceive. Everything is part of the cosmos. So therefore, necessarily, we ourselves come from the cosmos. But maybe not directly. Maybe there are other things that cosmos has created, something which created us. And that also, I can throw some light on that. Because it turns out that this largest reality that the Greeks call the cosmos, and they spelled it with the equivalent of a K, this largest reality is not directly the framework for the existence of the things that we perceive that we ourselves are. This largest reality created a domain where there is space and there is time, because we have logical reasons to suspect that the cosmos per se in itself is beyond space and time. It's a being, it's an existence, it's a system, if you like, that is not limited either by space or by time. But it created a domain where there is space and time. And you know what we call this domain, we call it the universe. And we have to add to this now that the universe isn't all there is. 50, 60 years ago, we thought that the galaxy, which is the Milky Way galaxy, is the whole universe. Now we know that there are billions of universes. Now we're also beginning to know or suspect that this universe isn't the only universe. It is one among perhaps a very large, perhaps an infinite series of universes. And this universe that we now call our universe is a space-time domain. It's an element in this spaceless, timeless wholeness, which the religions, the great spiritual systems perceived as Brahma, as the kingdom of God, as the spiritual domain, as a simple oneness, as the Tao. There are many names given to it, but this wholeness, this oneness, gave birth to a domain of space and time, which is finite. As Einstein pointed out, it's not unbounded, but finite. There are no boundaries to it. It can expand. But in itself, it's a finite domain. Now we know that this universe, our universe, came into being 13.8 billion years ago, supposedly, as far as our best calculations show. And that I don't know for how long it will last. It depends on whether the universe will continue to expand, reach some kind of a steady state, or will then start to contract. Depends on this, and this is not yet decided. Although most cosmologists think that it will start to contract again and reach again new quantum dimensions, like the whole universe and the head of a pin. And then it might re-expand again, might blow up, as it were, with another so-called Big Bang. These are all possibilities. But one thing that we know, that as it is, this universe is finite. there cannot be the kind of entities that we perceive in this universe, and of which we are one. Space-time entities made up of clusters of particles that make atoms, that make molecules, that make cells, that make multimolecular objects, that make ultimately stars and planets and galaxies. This kind of meaning, this kind of being, this kind of existence is not infinite in the universe. Sooner or later, the universe either will expand and then everything will cool off and this kind of material constructions cannot exist, or will contract and they'll heat up, and still this kind of constructions will not be able to exist. So to make a long story, multi-universe story short, it's likely that existence in this universe is finite. Existence as we know it is finite, but that the cosmos itself could be, we don't know for sure, we cannot know it for sure, but could be, very likely is infinite in itself. So we come from an infinite cosmos that gave birth to a finite universe, which in turn began a process that we call evolution. And this evolution started with the protons and neutrons meeting and the atom of the hydrogen, picking up an electron, and then transmuting in cosmic transmutational cosmic physical processes into heavier and heavier atoms until they fill the table of the atomic table of the elements, which in turn condense into molecules, and so the melody goes on. We are part of this process, which we call evolution, which is not limited to biological evolution. It's a cosmic process that brought forth the universe we know, as we know it, and that brought us forth. So if you ask, where did we come from? We come from the Big Bang that happened in this universe, and that has been evolving. We have been, and with our predecessors, the clusters of vibrational particles, quanta and atoms and so on. With those together, we come ever since then evolving together, reaching higher and higher levels of coherence and of consistency, complexity. That is us, part of cosmic evolution.
Well, Ervin, you have a new book that's just come out called The Intelligence of the Cosmos. Why Are We Here? New Answers from the Frontiers of Science. And in the book, you very eloquently describe some of these beginnings, making mention of the some 25 to 30 parameters of the universe that are fine-tuned to 1/billionth of a degree, and if they were not, the universe would not be what it is. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And the specific question in your mind, does that mean that the universe was created with a purpose?
Well, again, these are answers that we can piece together from the evidence. What is the most logical? You know, there's a saying that I like to cite, a saying by Einstein. He said, in science, we seek the simplest possible scheme that can tie together the observed facts. Think of that. Tying together the facts that we observe, that we consider facts, our observations. Tie them together so one thing doesn't hang just there loosely, but is part of a system in which all the other things are there. So now the question is, if you take this whole process that we call evolution, this cosmic process, which goes from physical to biological, to sociocultural, to psychological, evolution, different levels of the same evolutionary process, then what is the simplest possible scheme? Well, the simplest possible scheme would start from the observation that this process could not have been based on chance. It's not accidental. And there is mathematical, statistical proof for that. It turns out that the things that exist in this universe are so complex that if the age of the universe under the known processes would not be sufficient to explore all the possibilities, so as we'll hit on the possibilities that actually exist, that create and constitute the universe. The age of the universe will not be sufficient. we were surprised, not only the complex things, even simple things, like Fred Hoyle, the great mathematical physicist, tried this out on the Rubik cube, you know, this cube that has 6 faces, and then you have color codes and on 3 times 2 on each face. And if you start with a random configuration, you just turn it in randomly any odd way and ask yourself, how long would it take to hit on a perfect alignment of all sides, assuming that you take 1 second for each turn that you give it. If you do it randomly, you get a number which is 1.25 on the 25 power seconds. Sounds okay. Actually, it's longer than the age of the universe. So if you do it randomly, even a simple Rubik cube can be unscrambled within a reasonable time frame. When you come to a fruit fly, DNA relatively simple, but to constitute the DNA from all the possibilities of its genes, you know, to create that particular genetic code, again, will take far, far longer than the age of the universe. So it's very unlikely that things would exist in this universe on the basis of chance encounters. This is different from the mainstream view, which I think is in most schools and most mainstream science facilities are still maintained, but no longer at the leading edge. The mainstream view is that everything that we see in the universe is the result of chance interactions. It happened starting with the Big Bang, all this chaos that produced the quanta, the particles, which in turn produce the different configurations. All that is the result of chance encounters. It doesn't work for the reasons that I just mentioned. The universe is not old enough, not long enough, not old enough to be able to maintain, for us to maintain that it created us and the things around us purely by chance. So, what does that mean? That means if the universe isn't the product of chance, rather the things in the universe are not the product of chance, then what are they the product of? Something has created them, or somehow they came about. If it's not by chance, there must have been something that directed this process. Okay, I know it sounds anthropomorphic, but there is no other possibility. Either purely randomly, it happened to be the way it is, or there is a factor that at least reduced the randomness, even if allowed the random elements, must have reduced the randomness to sufficient extent so that out of this welter of interactions, the universe that we observe and that we inhabit has come about. So that means, that suggests that there is something behind it, beyond it, and that something is similar to, I'm trying to be very careful here, similar to, analogous to what we consider purpose. Another factor that I want to mention briefly is irreversibility. So non-randomness and irreversibility. If this universe consists of evolutionary processes that go from A to B, but it do not go exactly back from B to A. The next time they go, they don't reach exactly A, they reach A plus or something, you see. And then they move on to someplace else. So there is a general irreversibility which is now recognized in nature, in all natural processes. Therefore, we would say that there is a direction given by the irreversibility. If everything will be reversible, okay, then it will just fall back to where it was, and it can go again, fall back again, etc., etc. But if there's an irreversibility, it cannot go back to where it was. Once you left a state of affairs in nature, you cannot regain it again exactly the same way. That means that there is a direction. A goes to B, and B is not the same as A, and it cannot go back to A. Okay? That means a direction. Now, if you have a process that's non-random and has directionality, then at least on the human sphere, on the sphere of our everyday activity, then it says it is there for a purpose. It is there for the purpose for which it has been created. That would be a human entity, a human artifact. It's there for the purpose for which we created. If we created this television screen that that we are looking at, then it's there because we have assembled the various electronic elements in such a way that it gives you this screen, this display. in nature. Okay? There is irreversibility, and there is non-randomness, and therefore the same processes are there. An irreversible non-random process heads in one given direction. Could be several directions, but I mean not as simultaneously. It could cycle through different directions, but it moves in a predetermined sort of way. Not precisely, not in a mechanistic fashion, but it's more likely to go in one way than to go in another way. You put it very, very cautiously, not to arouse the ire of very traditional scientists. The fact is, we can't escape the conclusion that nature is an irreversible process of evolution, and it's a non-random process. Therefore, the simplest possible scheme that will tie together these facts is purpose. You don't say whose purpose, what purpose, why the purpose, but you must say something like purpose must be underlying these processes.
Well, very good. That's quite convincing that some process created this process purposefully, and we are moving forward in an irreversible evolutionary direction. So we might ask then, who are we? Are we a reflection of this original purpose? And concurrently with that, where are we going? How does this purpose carry itself out in the long term?
You know, this would be a simpler question. We could even deduce it more or less from these facts, observational facts that we talked about. If it wasn't the fact that we are conscious. Consciousness really throws a monkey wrench into our explanations, because consciousness is not necessarily deducible simply from the physical elements that underlie it, for example, from the brain. Who we are is not just a system of biological components acting in a certain way, even if it's irreversible and non-random. But who we are is also a conscious being. And that means that the question is more complex. We are a conscious system in a directional universe. If we would say that this consciousness is simply a product of our body, of our brain, of our nervous system, then the question would again go back to being relatively simple. The body, in its evolutionary processes, produced the brain is working and is producing consciousness. It's sort of like a turbine producing electricity. If the turbine works, the electricity comes about as a kind of a byproduct. If the turbine stops, the flow of electricity stops. If this was the case, okay, then we'll be back to a traditional, rather materialist, mechanistic view. But it turns out, and this is the monkey wrench, thank goodness, because otherwise they will be a much poorer kind of entities than they actually turn out to be. It turns out that the consciousness, what we call the mind, this sequence of sensations that constitute our identity, our place in the world, it does not entirely cease with the cessation of activity in the brain. We know that, first of all, from near-death experiences, so many people, more and more people that I talk to come up saying, yes, but I had a near-death experience, and I'm clinically dead, and I can tell everything that happened during that time. So many people have that. And then we have other evidence reports coming from also from after this. So this is not the time to go into detail into this, but just to say that consciousness is not reducible to brain function. Therefore, it's not reducible to biology. Consciousness is itself an element in the universe. This total system, a total quantum system, it's a holographic, interacting, non-mechanistic ensemble of elements that the universe turns out to be, that is not reducible to any part of it. It is more likely that it has information and energy that is in the whole system. Every part that is in it, that is an element of it, is a segment of that information and that energy. Clearest best explanation is a holographic segment because in a hologram, all the information in the whole system is present in every part of the system. So, clearest, simplest explanation we can find, the most logical one, is that consciousness is basic to the universe. I would not go so far as many of my colleagues do, say that consciousness has created the universe. I think the universe is a creation in itself, but it's not purely a physical entity. It's an informational entity. It's a quantum system which is running on information. A bit, that reductionist sounding statement, but information is so basic to it that nothing in this world would be what it is if it didn't have that total information. By the way, recently, a colleague of mine called my attention to the fact that Rudolf Steiner, the famous visionary, came up with this notion of an etheric force, which he called is the evolutionary force, and this comes from beyond space and time. And it's very much why the modern quantum sciences one talks about the information from the implicate order to the explicate order, as David Bohm would say. This is not unique to any one thinker or to science. The idea that the universe is a system based on energy and information. And if you ask what is any one part of this universe, you would have to say any coherent part, any part that we can identify as an element in the system is an element of informed energy. That's the closest I can come, the simplest explanation can come. Informed energy, but I spell informed with a hyphen, like David Bohm did. It's formative, a formative element. Energy is being constantly formed, and we are part of this formed energy in the universe.
So let's try and summarize here. We just got a few minutes left, but it seems like maybe we're creating something closer to infinite out of our finite space-time field, and that something seems to be consciousness. Whether or not we came from that and we're a self-reflection of it. Let's end here on what is the purpose of this consciousness. You recently came up with a 13-point principles of the meaning of the universe in a recent tribute we did for you. And I think you summarized it quite well there at the end. Could you share with us your true feelings about what the ultimate purpose of this consciousness is?
Well, I'm willing to go further out on a limb, because I think this is something that we can guess at. We can make the most reasonable guess at it. It seems to me that all of evolution, and I mean in a comprehensive, entirely embracing sense, from the Big Bang to today and then going on, all of evolution points in a direction of coherence, of wholeness, of connection, interconnection, and joint further development, co-evolution. And it seems to me that the purpose is to reach the highest level of coherence that we can have in a space-time universe. Coherence meaning that just as the protons and the neutrons in an atom, the nucleus of a hydrogen atom, are held together by an invisible force, which creates the coherence so that electrons can join and can create more and more complex atoms. The same way, everything in this universe seems to create higher level systems, clusters of systems, and they are coherent. They are coherent internally and coherent externally. I mean, they are coherent in terms of the elements that make up the system. They're all coherent with one another, or as much as possible, I would say, coherent with one another. If any part in an organism is not coherent with the rest, then that organism is sick. It has a malady. That's one part that is not, and what subsystem that is not coherent with the rest keeps being separate from the rest of the body, of the rest of the system, then it's called cancer. But every illness, every disease is a lack of coherence in the system. That's internal coherence. There's also external coherence. We need to be coherent with our environment, with the world around us, with other people, with nature. And that's also what we are lacking very much. We are subject to diseases, lack of internal coherence. We are subject to this alienation from nature and from each other, this lack of alignment in the world. So we are on the way toward higher and higher levels of coherence, but we are booby-trapped. We are in a dead-end street when it comes to certain levels of coherence, which we cannot and do not seem to be able to reach. We need to recover our coherence. So just to end this brief discussion, I call this total coherence, which is both the internal coherence of the system within it and the coherence between the system and its environment, I call it supercoherence. That's the term used in science. That means full coherence of all elements within a system. And every system is part of a larger system. So our purpose seems to be to move toward supercoherence, because nature is creating laws of nature. Or I have to say the cosmos is creating laws of nature which structure these processes in such a way that they become more and more coherent. It's a fancy way of saying nature is seeking coherence and ultimately is moving toward higher and higher levels, internal, external coherence, towards supercoherence. So as conscious beings in nature, in this universe, we are free, we are able to further this process. We are also free to block it. And sometimes purposefully, sometimes just by ignorance. But if you are conscious evolutionary agents, we are seeking and to purposefully foster coherence in us and between us, among us. That would be the summary of what I say would be the purpose for which we are here.
Well, thank you very much, Ervin, for those beautiful thoughts. And I must say, you are the element of supercoherence in this new paradigm movement, the pioneer of the new paradigm. Thank you so much for your many, many decades of dedication to this. You have really led the way as a pioneer of this new paradigm, showing us the path towards supercoherence. You are the attractor that many of us at the Global Purpose Movement all move towards and give us meaning in our evolutionary process. So thank you so much for being with us today, for your many years of dedication, for your brilliant insights on the purpose of the universe, both where it came from, who we are, and where we're going from here.
Well, thank you, Emmanuel. My purpose of bringing this to a wider public could not be fulfilled unless we had people like you, like your movement, the Purpose Movement, and your Green Heart International, and all these friends and movements who are moving consciously toward a higher level of coherence. That's what counts. I'm just hoping to provide a little impetus toward it.
Well, you've provided a great deal, Ervin, and we're all indebted to you. Thank you for being the philosophical visionary and scientist that you've been. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your vision with us here today. Many blessings to you.
Thank you, Emmanuel.
All right. Thank you. Ervin Laszlo with the Global Purpose Movement.